You've tuned in to the unavailing frequency. But don't touch that dial. We've got you right where we want you.
Welcome to Harrow, the town that isn't supposed to exist. Account number 1, the diorama. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that only exists on Interstate 80 at 3 in the morning. It's a heavy, narcotic fatigue that settles behind your eyes, born from staring at nothing but the hypnotic rhythm of the dotted white lines and the endless black ocean of Nebraska farmland. I was making a solo move from Denver to Omaha in late September. My car was packed to the roof with cardboard boxes, leaving just enough room for me to see out the passenger window and the rearview mirror. The plan had been to power through the night, beat the morning commuter traffic, crash on my new apartment floor by sunrise. Somewhere past North Plate, the monotony broke. My car's dashboard screen flickered. The digital map, which had been reliably charting my straight-line progress for hours, suddenly glitched. The blue line representing my route splintered into a web of jagged digital static. A moment later, the GPS reset, but the little blue triangle represented my car was now floating in a sea of gray. No roads, no topography, just an empty grid. "Come on," I muttered, tapping the screen. The only response was a violent, high-pitched ping from the speakers, followed by a computerized voice. "Recalculating." Ahead, the highway was suddenly reduced to a single lane, choked off by a fleet of flashing orange construction barrels. A crude electronic sign blared, "Night work ahead, expect delays, detour exits 2 miles. I looked at the dashboard clock, 2:14 a.m. The thought of sitting in standstill construction traffic for an hour was unbearable. I figured I could take a county road, run parallel to the interstate a few miles, and hop back on past the work zone. I've driven in the Midwest enough to know that the roads out here are just a massive grid. You can't really get lost if you keep heading east. That was my first mistake. I took the next exit, tires rumbling over the corrugated rubble strips, and plunged off the interstate. Within 2 miles, the pavement ended abruptly, transitioning into a hard-packed dirt road. Dust plumed behind me in a thick, choking cloud illuminated by the red glow of my taillights. I drove for 20 minutes. The interstate, which I had expected to see glowing in my rearview mirror, had vanished entirely. There was no light pollution on the horizon I could see. The darkness out here was absolute, pressing against the window of my sedan like deep water. The only thing visible were the towering stalks of late-season corn crowding the edge of the dirt road, whipping against my side mirrors. Then, the environment shifted. It wasn't sudden. It was a gradient of wrongness. First, the road changed. The jarring washboard vibration of the dirt smoothed out completely. I looked down out the driver's side window. The dirt transitioned to asphalt. But it wasn't just asphalt, it was perfect. There were no cracks, no loose gravel, no faded sun-bleached stripes. The yellow lines down the center were visibly bright. Perfect. As if the paint had just dried. The road was unnaturally smooth to the point where the hum of my tires just completely disappeared. I rolled down my windows, intending to listen for the distant roar of I-80. Instead, a profound, suffocating silence flooded the cabin. If you've ever been in the country at night, you know it isn't quiet. It's deafening. Crickets, cicadas, wind rushing through the corn, the rustle of unseen animals. But here, the air was dead. There was no wind. The temperature outside matched the temperature inside my car exactly. A perfectly neutral, stagnant 72 degrees. And strangest of all, looking at my windshield, I realized I hadn't hit a single bug since I took the exit. The corn stalks abruptly gave way. The road widened and streetlights began to appear overhead. They weren't the harsh white LEDs of modern cities, nor the warm orange sodium lights of older towns. They cast a pale, sickly yellow glow, like the color of an old bruise or aging parchment. A weathered wooden sign on the shoulder of the road. Didn't have a population count. Didn't boast a high school mascot or a mayoral welcoming message. It just read in stark black stenciled letters, "Welcome to Harrow." I slowed the car down to a crawl. The town was a quintessential slice of Americana preserved like a fly in amber. Brick storefronts lined a two-lane main street. I saw a hardware store with pitch-black windows, a small diner with a neon sign that simply said food, and a post office. It looked like an old movie set, or worse, a diorama. Everything was just too clean. The sidewalks were devoid of trash, leaves, or even dust. The brickwork on the buildings were uniform, showing no signs of weathering or age. I checked my phone. No service. The GPS was still just a blue triangle spinning in an endless gray void. I felt a cold knot tightening in my stomach. This primal instinct buried deep down in my brainstem, quietly suggesting I turn around and drive back in the dark, but rationality fought back. I was low on gas, exhausted, hopelessly lost. I just needed to find a map. Up ahead, a 2-pump gas station sat at the corner of an intersection. The lights inside the small convenience store were on, so I pulled into the parking lot. Perfect silence of the town broken only by the crunch of my tires. I parked beside a pump that looked like it was manufactured in the late 1980s. I left the engine running, put the car in park, and stepped out. The silence hit me once again, heavier this time. It felt like pressure in my ears. I slammed my car door. The sound didn't even echo. It was instantly swallowed by the stillness, as if the air itself were padded. I walked toward the glass door of the station. As I reached for the handle, a bell mounted above the frame chime, ding-dong. A man stepped out from the back room behind the counter. At a glance, he was the picture of a rural night shift worker. He wore faded blue jeans, a red and black flannel shirt, and a blank navy blue baseball cap. But as he walked toward the register, I stopped dead in my tracks, my hands still hovering inches from the door handle. There was just something profoundly wrong with how he moved. When a normal person walks, there's a natural rhythm. Your heel strikes, your knee bends, your weight shifts, your head bobs slightly with impact. But this man's head did not move vertically. I mean at all. He moved forward as if he were suspended on an invisible track, gliding across the linoleum floor. His limbs moved, his legs took steps, but his torso, his head, they remained perfectly, rigidly level. He stopped behind the register and turned to face the door. He didn't look at my car, he didn't look at my face. He stared with an unblinking intensity directly at my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to run, but the logical part of my brain was screaming I was just being paranoid. He's just a guy. Maybe he had a prosthetic. Maybe he was just exhausted. Maybe I was exhausted. I pushed the door open. "Evening," I said, my voice sounding far too loud in the dead air of the store. The man did not react immediately. A full 3-second pause, then his lips parted. "It is the evening," he said. His voice was like dead air over a radio. It had no pitch, no cadence, no emotion. It was a flat, synthesized drone, as if he had memorized the phonetic sounds of the words without understanding what they meant. "Right." I forced a nervous laugh, stepping up to the counter. Up close, his skin. It was terribly smooth. There were no pores, no stubble, no blemishes or wrinkles. It looked like matte plastic. And his eyes, they were brown. They lacked depth. They looked as if they were painted on. "Hey, my GPS died," I continued, desperate to fill the silence. "I got turned around trying to avoid construction back on I-80. Can you point me towards the interstate, or maybe you've got a physical map I can borrow?" Another 3-second pause. His eyes remained locked on my throat. "The interstate is a place for leaving," he replied. "Yeah, Exactly. I'm trying to leave. I took a step back. The smell of the store finally registered. It didn't smell like stale coffee or hot dogs or gasoline. It smelled wrong. Like a smell of ozone, like a metallic tang in the air right after a lightning strike, mixed with the scent of an old dusty attic. The man smiled. The corners of his mouth pulled back horizontally, stretching his tight lips taut over perfectly square, blindingly white teeth. The smile didn't reach the rest of his face. His eyes remained completely dead. "You are in Harrow," he said, the smile holding frozen on his face. "Thanks, I'll figure it out." I mumbled, backing away towards the door. I turned and bolted for my car. I didn't care about gas anymore. I didn't care about the map. I just needed to put as much distance between myself and this plastic man as possible. As I grabbed my car door, a new sound cut through the silence. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. I froze, looking across the empty street. The town was no longer empty. I had been in the gas station for maybe 2 minutes. When I walked in, Main Street was deserted. Now there were people, dozens of them. They hadn't made any sound arriving. There were no car engines, no opening doors, no footsteps. Across the street, an older woman was sweeping the sidewalk in front of the hardware store. Swish, swish, swish. But as I squinted through the sickly yellow light, I saw that the bristles on her broom were hovering a full 2 inches above the concrete. She was sweeping nothing, her arms moving in a rigid, repeating loop. Down the block, a man in a business suit was walking a dog, but the leash hung slack, dragging on the ground. There was no dog. The man was just walking, pantomiming the posture of someone holding a heavy leash, his head gliding perfectly level through the air. On the corner, 2 teenage boys were throwing a baseball back and forth, but there was no ball. One would make a violently fast, snapping throwing motion, and a second later the other one would snap his glove shut in the air, and you hear the smack. The sound of the ball hitting the leather echoed, even though there was nothing there. The audio didn't match the visual. It was a terrible delayed pantomime. My breathing grew shallow, my chest felt tight. I was standing in the middle of a hive, and the drones were acting out their approximations of human life. I dropped my keys. They hit the perfect asphalt with a sharp metallic clink. The sweeping stopped. The baseball game stopped. The man walking the invisible dog halted. Every single figure on the street slowly turned their heads toward me. Their bodies remained facing whichever direction they had been walking, but their necks twisted, some pivoting entirely too far until every pair of eyes were locked onto me. Through the glass of the gas station, I saw the attendant had moved out from behind the corner. He was standing pressed against the glass, staring out at me. His mouth was open in a wide, silent O. For a terrifying, agonizing moment, the entire town was perfectly still, bathed in that bruising yellow light. Then, in absolute horrifying unison, every single one of them blinked. I didn't scream. My throat was too tight. I snatched my keys off the ground, threw myself into the driver's seat, and slammed the lock button. I threw the car into reverse. My tires shrieked as I backed out of the lot. None of them ran towards me. None of them lunged. Instead, as I threw the car in drive and slammed my foot onto the accelerator, they all simply took one step forward, a synchronized gliding step off the sidewalk and onto the street. I watched them in my rearview mirror as I tore down the perfect asphalt, pushing my car to 80, then 90 miles an hour. They stood in the middle of the road, a small crowd of rigid silhouettes under the yellow lights. They were watching my taillights fade until the road curved and they were swallowed by the dark. I drove for what felt like an eternity. The silence inside the car was deafening. I didn't dare look back, out the side windows or into the corn. Suddenly, the car slammed into a rut, launching my head into the roof. The perfect asphalt had ended, giving way violently to the washboard dirt road. The moment I hit the dirt, the ambient sound returned, the roar of the wind, the crunch of the gravel, and on my dashboard, the GPS screen burst back to life, the map populating with county roads and a bright blue line directing me toward I-80. I didn't stop until I saw the sunrise hitting the Omaha skyline. I spent the last 3 months trying to prove I didn't lose my mind. I've scoured Google Earth, zooming in on every square mile of Dawson, Lincoln, and Custer counties. I've gone to the public library, dug through physical property maps from the 1950s till now. I even called the state surveyor's office claiming I was looking for an historical marker on a town called Harrow. The surveyor was polite but confused. "Sir," he said, "I've worked in Nebraska zoning for 30 years. There is no town called Harrow, and there never has been." He's right. Harrow isn't on any map. It's a forgotten ghost town or defunct pioneer settlement. It's a stage. It's a diorama sitting in the dark of the American Midwest. And the most terrifying part isn't that they aren't human. It's that they are studying us. They are practicing. And if they ever get it right, we'll never be able to tell them apart. This is Welcome to Harrow, the town that isn't supposed to exist. Account number 2, the diner. I drive an 18-wheeler for a living. If there's a stretch of asphalt between the Rockies and the Appalachians, I've hauled freight over it. You do this job for 2 decades, you learn to trust your gut. You learn the difference between a sleepy town that rolls up the sidewalks at 8 p.m. and a place that shouldn't be there at all. When I read the first account about Harrow, the hair on my arm stood up. Because I swear, I've been there before. And let me tell you, whoever wrote that report got off lucky. By the time I found Harrow, they weren't just practicing their pantomimes from a distance anymore. They were trying to interact. It was mid-November, about 2 months after the first guy drove through. A freak ice storm was sweeping across the plains, turning I-80 into a skating rink. Visibility was maybe 30 feet. Trucks were jackknifing cars deep in the ditches, and I knew I had to get off the highway before my rig became a 2-ton sled. I took a rural exit blindly, hoping to find a truck stop or a wide shoulder to wait out the storm. My GPS's screen flickered, the map dissolving into a blank gray void with a single blue arrow spinning wildly. I cursed, assuming the satellite receiver was caked in ice. I crept down the dark 2-lane county road at 10 miles an hour. The sleet was hammering my windshield like buckshot. And then, it just stopped. I don't mean the storm slowly died. I mean I crossed some invisible threshold and the weather ceased to exist. 1 second my wipers were fighting heavy ice, and the next, they were squeaking against dry, perfectly clean glass. I looked in my mirrors, and behind me was a wall of swirling white fog and sleet. Ahead of me, a perfectly dry, pitch-black night. The road beneath my tires smoothed out into pristine, jet-black asphalt. I rolled my windows down, and the freezing wind was gone, replaced by perfectly still, room-temperature air. The smell faintly of ozone, like a model train set running too hot. A few miles down the road, the sickly yellow streetlights began to appear, and I saw the sign, "Welcome to Harrow." I should have turned the rig around right there, but an 18-wheeler isn't a Honda Civic. You can't just hang a U-turn on a 2-lane road. I had to keep going until I found an intersection or a lot wide enough to maneuver. I rolled down Main Street, the air brakes hissing loudly in the suffocating silence of the town. I spotted the neon sign the first guy mentioned that just read food. There was a dirt lot next to it, big enough for me to pull a wide turn, but my stomach growled, and a foolish, deeply human part of my brain reasoned that if there was a diner, there must be a local who could tell me what the hell was going on with the weather and the roads. I parked the rig, left it idling, and walked for the diner. The moment I pushed the heavy glass door open, a bell chimed above me. Ding dong. I stepped inside and wiped my boots. The first thing that hit me was the smell, or rather, total lack of it. A diner at 1 a.m., it should smell like stale coffee, burning grease, and old cigarettes. But this place smelled like a hospital corridor. sterile, empty. There were 4 people in that diner. A couple sat in the booth by the window, a solitary man sat at the counter, and behind the counter was a waitress in a pale blue uniform. As the door closed behind me, all 4 of them stopped what they were doing, and they didn't turn to look at me, but their bodies were completely rigid. "Evening," I grunted, taking a seat at the stool a few down from the solitary man. The waitress turned to face me. The first guy was right about the walk. She moved laterally down the counter, her torso gliding smoothly, but she was trying to incorporate a head bob. It was horrifying. Her head jerked up and down mechanically, completely out of rhythm with her steps, like a broken animatronic bird. She stopped in front of me. Her skin was flawless, her eyes a flat, muddy brown. "Greetings to this establishment," she said. Her voice was synthesized, completely devoid of inflection. The sound didn't seem to come from her throat, it was just in the air between us. Just a coffee, black," I said, keeping my voice steady, "and maybe a menu." She stared at my forearm. "You require the sustenance to maintain the fleshly vessel." Yeah, I'm hungry." She reached beneath the counter and placed a menu in front of me. It was printed on thick, glossy paper. I opened it, my stomach plummeted. There were no words, just perfectly centered, high-definition photographs of food. A picture of a raw steak, a picture of a whole unpeeled potato, a picture of a glass of milk, but none of it looked quite right. The steak had no fat marbling, it was just a solid block of red. The milk looked thick, like white house paint. I guess I'll just take a slice of cherry pie," I mumbled, closing the menu. If you have it." "Cherry pie," she repeated, her lips barely moving. "I will retrieve the baked matter." She glided into the back kitchen. I took a breath and glanced at the man sitting a few stools away. He wore a gray suit. He was eating a plate of eggs. I watched him take a bite, and he scooped the eggs with a fork, shoved them into his mouth, and began to chew. His jaw moved exactly up and down. Clack, clack, clack. His teeth were hitting together violently, but the most terrifying part was his throat. He wasn't swallowing anything. The chewed up mass of food was just building up in his cheeks, packing tighter and tighter like a chipmunk hoarding nuts. I looked away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I glanced at the couple in the booth. They were having a conversation. The woman's mouth was moving rapidly, her face contorting into exaggerated expressions of joy, and then sorrow, then anger, cycling through human emotions like a slideshow on fast forward. But she wasn't making a sound. The man across from her was nodding, his eyes blinking furiously, first the left eye, then the right eye, then both. They were putting on a play, and I was the audience. The waitress returned. She set a ceramic mug of coffee and a plate with a slice of cherry pie in front of me. Steam was rising from the coffee, but when I touched the mug, the ceramic was ice cold. "Consume," the waitress said. She didn't walk away. She stood directly across from the counter, leaning in. She was close enough that I could see that she didn't have any pupils. It was just a solid iris of flat brown. I looked at the pie. The crust was perfectly smooth. The filling was a vibrant, glowing red, but it wasn't food. It looked like colored wax. I'm actually not that hungry," I said, sliding off the stool. I should get back to my truck." The diner was dead silent. The man chewing the egg stopped. Clack! His jaw froze open. The couple in the booth stopped their silent pantomime. "You requested the baked matter," the waitress said. Her voice was louder now, buzzing slightly with a metallic reverb. "You must demonstrate the consumption." "Keep it." I threw a crumpled $5 bill on the counter. "Keep the change." I turned toward the door. The man in the gray suit jumped up, and he didn't push his stool back. He just stood, his knees locking with a sickening pop. "Demonstrate the consumption." The man in the suit repeated. His voice was exactly the same as the waitress's, the same flat, synthesized pitch. The couple in the booth slid out into the aisle, blocking my path to the door. Panic, hot and primal panic, flooded my veins. I'm 6'2" and 250 pounds. I've been in my share of roadhouse brawls, but looking at these things, I knew a punch wouldn't do anything. Hitting them would be like punching a mannequin filled with concrete. "Get out of my way," I barked, puffing my chest out. The woman from the booth tilted her head, her neck cracked loudly. "Show us the facial configuration for satisfaction," she droned in that same uniform voice. "How does the consumption make you feel?" They took a synchronized step towards me. I didn't wait. I grabbed a heavy glass ketchup bottle off the nearest table and hurled it directly at the front window. It shattered with a deafening crash. The noise seemed to hurt them. All four of them spasmed, their hands flying to the sides of their heads. Their perfectly smooth faces twisted into masks of digitized glitching horror. Their mouths opened in silent screams. I bolted. I dove through the shattered window, tearing my heavy Carhartt jacket on the jagged glass, and hit the perfect asphalt outside. I sprinted towards my idling rig. The sickly yellow streetlights flickered wildly, strobing like a dying fluorescent tube. As I reached the cab and hauled myself up the steps, I looked back at the diner. They were all standing in the broken window. The waitress, the man in the suit, the couple. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, their arms hanging limply at their sides. They weren't looking at me. They were all staring at the crumpled $5 bill I had left on the counter, examining it like it was some kind of alien artifact. I slammed the heavy door, threw the rig into gear, and floored it. The trailer fishtailed wildly on the perfect asphalt before straightening out. I laid on the air horn, a massive, deafening blast that echoed through the dead town. Out of my mirrors, I saw doors opening all down Main Street, dozens of figures stepping out into the yellow, strobing light. I didn't look back. I drove the rig to 85 miles an hour, praying the road didn't end in a wall. 10 minutes later, the rig slammed into a massive pothole, throwing me violently against the seatbelt. The darkness of Harrow shattered. My windshield was instantly plastered with freezing rain. The roaring wind returned, shaking the cab of my truck. The GPS on my dashboard binged happily, the map popping back up, showing me on a desolate county road miles from I-80. I drove all the way to Iowa before I finally pulled over. They are learning. The first guy saw them practicing in a vacuum, but I saw them trying to run the simulation with a live subject. They want to know how we eat. They want to know how we emote. They want to know how we converse with one another. And I don't know what happens when they finally gather enough data, but I know one thing for certain. I will never, ever take a detour in Nebraska again. This is Welcome to Harrow, the town that isn't supposed to exist. Account number 3, the flashing lights. If you're reading these reports and thinking, why would anyone ever stop in that town? And you haven't been paying much attention. First two guys stopped because they were tired, confused, or looking for help. But the things in Harrow are learning. They realize that a dark diner, a weird gas station aren't enough to lure everyone in. Some of us see the empty streets and step on the gas. So they figured out how to make a stop. They learned about authority. I'm a junior at UNL down in Lincoln. 2 weeks ago, I was driving back from a weekend trip to Wyoming. It was around 3:30 a.m. I was blasting music, chewing on ice from a gas station cup to stay awake, just trying to burn through the last stretch of I-80. Just like the others had said, it all started with the GPS. The screen flickered, spazzed out into a web of gray static, and then showed my car floating in nothingness. Next came the detour sign, glowing bright orange, forcing all traffic off the highway. So I took the exit and I hit the dirt road. 20 minutes later, the violent shaking of the gravel turned into the silent, buttery smooth glide of perfect asphalt. The crickets outside had stopped chirping. The wind completely died. When I saw the weathered "Welcome to Harrow" sign bathed in that sickly, bruised yellow light, every instinct in my body screamed at me. I hadn't even read those forum posts yet, but I didn't need to. The town was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It looked like a museum exhibit of a town. I locked my doors, rolled up my windows, and I kept my foot steady on the gas. I was not going to stop. I blew past the gas station and the diner at 60 miles an hour, completely ignoring the 25-mile-per-hour speed limit signs. I thought I was being smart. I thought I had beat their trap. But then, out of nowhere, the siren started. It didn't wail or fluctuate like a normal police siren. It was a single piercing, unchanging electronic tone. Eeeeee, like a microphone feeding back, but deafeningly loud. My rearview mirror exploded with flashing red and blue lights. A police cruiser had pulled out from a side street and was riding my bumper. At least it looked like a cruiser. In the frantic flashes of light, I could see the paint job was entirely matte black and white. There were no decals, no "to protect and serve," no county crest, just the word "police" printed on the side in massive, plain, white block letters. Panic seized me. I was speeding. I was lost. My brain defaulted to its conditioning. When you see flashing lights, you pull over. I eased onto the shoulder, my tires crunching against the perfect curb. I put the car into park and left the engine running. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I watched the side mirror as the driver door of the cruiser opened. The officer stepped out. The trucker who wrote the second account mentioned how the witness tried to mimic a human head bob when she walked. The cop had clearly been practicing. He walked towards my car, but his head bobbed violently with every step, thrusting forward, jerking back and forth like a pigeon pecking at the ground. It was agonizing to watch. He wore a dark blue uniform. The fabric was completely stiff, creasing like cardboard. The silver badge pinned to his chest was a blank, unengraved shield. He stopped next to my window. The streetlights cast deep shadows over his face. His jaw was clenched so hard his cheeks were trembling, his lips pulled down into a cartoonish, exaggerated scowl of authority. He knocked on my windows. His knuckles didn't make a tapping sound. They hit the glass with a heavy, dense thud, like a brick wrapped in leather. I rolled the window down exactly 2 inches. "Officer?" I squeaked. "Cease your forward momentum," he droned. The voice was identical to what the others described. Flat, synthesized, a hive mind speaking through a meat puppet. I'm sorry, I was just lost. The detour." "Present the identifying parchment," he interrupted. His face never relaxed from that focused, trembling scowl. "This is to prove your classification." My license?" I asked, my hands fumbling for the wallet in the center console. "The plastic rectangle of authority," he confirmed. I slid my driver's license through the small crack in the window. He took it with 2 fingers, his skin perfectly smooth, devoid of knuckles, fingernails, or pores. But he didn't even read it. He didn't even look at the front of the card. He just held it up to his ear, as if he were listening to it. After 5 seconds, he lowered it. "This is acceptable data," he stated. He didn't give it back, he just dropped it onto the asphalt. Then he leaned closer to the crack in my window. The overpowering smell of ozone, burning plastic wafted into the car, thick and suffocating. "You have broken the rule of speed," he said. "You must step out of this metal enclosure. You must be processed for the container." The container? No. I'll just pay the ticket, the fine." I stammered, frantically checking my rearview mirror. Just write me a ticket." "Step into the air," he commanded. He grabbed the handle of my locked door and pulled. The car shook. He wasn't pulling like a human pulls. There was no leverage, no straining. He just clamped his hand on the plastic handle and moved his arm backwards with unstoppable mechanical force like a hydraulic press. The door frame began to groan. The metal began to buckle. Hey, stop! I screamed. I looked past him across the street. The town had come alive again under the pale yellow lights. About 24 people had gathered out on the sidewalk. They were all wearing normal clothes, flannels, dresses, jeans, but they were all holding perfectly uniform black notebooks. They were watching the cop. Some of them were furiously scribbling in their notebooks. Others were practicing the cop's exaggerated scowl, their faces twitching as they tried to lock their muscles into place. They were taking notes. They were observing how a human submits to authority. Crack! My door handle snapped completely off, flying into the darkness. The cop stood there for a second, looking at the broken plastic in his hand. He seemed confused that the door hadn't opened. That momentary glitch was all I needed. I slammed the gear shift into drive and I stomped on the gas pedal. The tires squealed as the car lurched forward. The cop dropped the handle and lunged. His hand clamped down on the window as I left it exposed, and his grip was like a vice. The car accelerated to 20 miles an hour and he didn't let go. He didn't run alongside the car. He simply locked his legs and let the car drag him. His black boots scraped violently against the asphalt, throwing a massive shower of orange sparks into the air. But he didn't even flinch. His face maintained that horrible, terrifying scowl. Crash! The window shattered under the pressure of his grip. Glass rained down on my lap. He fell away, tumbling into the street as I floored it, pushing the speedometer past 90 miles an hour. I glanced back in my rearview mirror one last time before I hit the curve. The cop was standing perfectly upright in the middle on the road. He had drawn his gun, a solid, molded block of black plastic. He was pointing it at my fleeing car. There was no muzzle flash, there were no bullets, but over the rushing wind pouring through my shattered window, I swear I could hear his flat, synthesized voice echoing down the street. Bang! 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 10 seconds later, the perfect asphalt turned back into dirt. The violent shaking of the country road returned, and my GPS lit up like a Christmas tree. I left my car in Lincoln and took a bus back home to my parents' house for a week. I'm terrified to drive right now. They aren't just observing anymore. They're not just trying to talk to us. They are learning the rules of our society. They're learning what makes us vulnerable, what makes us stop, what makes us obey. If you see a detour on Interstate 80 in the middle of the night, please keep driving, even if you have to sit in traffic for hours. Because if you see those flashing lights in Harrow, you step out of your car for processing, I guarantee you'll never get back in.
Cease your forward momentum. Step into the air.
This is Welcome to Harrow, account number 4, The Good Samaritan. If you read the third report, you know that they figured out how to use authority to make us stop. But the thing about a police siren is that it triggers a fight or flight response. Some people pull over, but others, like the college kid in account 3, panic and hit the gas. The things in Harrow must have realized that authority is a flawed trap. It's too aggressive. So they pivoted to a much more reliable human instinct: compassion. I'm an off-duty EMT. I'm hardwired to run toward a disaster. If I see a wreck, I don't keep driving. I pull over. I grab my trauma bag and I go to work. It's a muscle memory reflex. And whatever is running this town somehow knows about it. It was late April. I was driving my old Jeep Wrangler cross country, moving from a precinct in Salt Lake City to a new gig in Chicago. The setup was exactly the same as the others. The GPS flatlined into a gray abyss. The orange detour signs funneled me off of I-80 and onto the teeth-rattling dirt road, eventually smoothed out into that impossible jet-black asphalt. The dead silence fell over the car. The bugs vanished from the windshield. Up ahead, those bruised, pale yellow streetlights pierced through the darkness. I slowed down as I passed the Welcome to Harrow sign. I hadn't read these forums yet. I just thought it was a weird, hyper-isolated farm town. Then my headlights washed over the wreck. Right in the middle of Main Street, a silver minivan had slammed head-on into a cast-iron streetlight. The hood was violently crumpled. A thick plume of gray smoke was billowing from the engine block. I slammed on the brakes. I threw the Jeep into park, and I grabbed my medical bag from the passenger seat. I didn't even think about the eerie silence or the fact that there was no water leaking from the radiator. There were no skid marks on the pristine asphalt. My adrenaline spiked. I ran toward the van. "Hey, can you hear me? EMS, are you hurt?" I yelled, my voice completely swallowed by the heavy, dead air of the town. The driver's side door was hanging open. A woman was laying on her back on the pavement, clutching at her stomach. As I got closer, I heard her crying. But this wasn't a normal cry. It sounded like an audio file on a 2-second loop. Sob, sniffle, gasp. Sob, sniffle, gasp. The rhythm was mathematically perfect. The pitch never changed. I dropped to my knees beside her. She was wearing a gray tracksuit. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure agony. Her eyes squeezed tight, her mouth stretched wide, but there were no tears on her cheeks. "I am experiencing the pain," she wailed, her voice projected with that flat, metallic reverb the trucker mentioned. "The eternal damage is severe. Help me." Okay, I'm right here. Don't move your neck," I said, unzipping my bag. "Where does it hurt?" "I am experiencing the pain," she repeated exactly. I reached out to check her carotid pulse. The moment my fingers pressed against her neck, a shock of pure revulsion sent me reeling backward. Her skin was room temperature. It felt like smooth, heavy silicone stretched over steel piping. There was no pulse, no heartbeat, not even the subtle, vibrating hum of human blood flowing through veins. Just a solid, unyielding density. I stared at her. My brain was desperately trying to process the medical impossibility of what I was touching. And that's when I noticed the blood. There was a puddle of crimson liquid pooling beneath her stomach. But it wasn't blood. Blood is viscous. It oxidizes, it turns brown. It follows the grooves of the pavement. But this liquid was blindingly, perfectly red like acrylic paint, and it had pulled into a flawless, mathematically perfect circle. What are you? My hands backing away from my trauma bag, the woman's eyes snapped open. They were dead. Flat brown disc, no pupils, no depth. Her face instantly relaxed from the mask of agony into a blank, smooth, and motionless state. The looping audio file of her crying abruptly cut off. "Why did you halt your vehicle?" she asked. The volume of her synthesized voice was so loud it rattled the loose debris on the pavement. I thought you were hurt," I stammered, scrambling backwards on my hands and feet. "Hurt?" she repeated. She sat up. She didn't use her arms to push herself off the ground. Her torso simply hinged upward in a flawless 90-degree angle defying gravity. She reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was like a steel vice. The pressure was instantaneous and crushing. I felt my radius and ulna groan under the pressure. "You observed the simulation of damage," she droned, her face inches from mine, smelling violently of ozone and hot copper. "Demonstrate the pity. Show us the face of the rescuer." "Let me go!" I screamed, thrashing wildly as I swung my free fist, punching her squarely in the jaw. It was like punching a cinder block. My knuckles split open. A jolt of agonizing pain shot up my arm and to my shoulder. Her head didn't even twitch. Swish, swish, swish. I heard the synchronized sound of gliding footsteps. I looked frantically over my shoulder. The empty street was suddenly crowded, at least 40 of them. Men, women, teenagers. They had formed a perfect, tightly packed circle around us. They were bathed in that sickly, yellow streetlight. Every single one of them was holding a small black notebook. They were staring down at me, their flat brown eyes unblinking, their pens hovering over the paper. They weren't there to help her. They were there to observe me. They were running a clinical trial on human empathy, and I was the lab rat caught in the maze. "Demonstrate the pity!" the crowd chanted in unison, their synthesized voices overlapping into a deafening metallic chorus. Panic took over. With my free hand, I reached out to the side pocket of my EMT pants, grabbed my heavy steel trauma shears, and drove the blunt tip as hard as I could into the crook of the woman's elbow. There was a loud snap, like thick plastic breaking. Her arm jerked, her grip loosened just a fraction of an inch. I ripped my wrist free, leaving a layer of skin behind, and scrambled to my feet. I abandoned my trauma bag. I shoved past a man in a mail carrier uniform. He felt as heavy as a bronze statue. I sprinted for the Jeep. I dove into my driver's side seat, slammed the door, and threw it into reverse. As I backed away, my headlights illuminated the crowd. They hadn't moved to chase me. They were just standing in that perfect circle around the woman in the crashed minivan. But as I shifted into drive, every single one of them raised their notebooks and began to furiously write. I floored it out of Harrow. My bruised wrist was throbbing, my bloody knuckles gripping the steering wheel. I hit the dirt road, the GPS snapping back to life, and the freezing night wind howled back into the cabin. I don't stop for broken down cars anymore. I don't care if there's smoke. I don't care if someone is crying, because they've figured out our biggest weakness. They know that a good person can't ignore a cry for help. And if you fall for that diorama of tragedy, you're going to become a permanent part of their exhibit. This is Welcome to Harrow, the town that isn't supposed to exist. Account number 5, the vacancy. If you've been following these posts, you've probably noticed a pattern. The town of Harrow relies on human choices. You choose to pull over, you choose to get out of your car, you choose to check on the accident. But I'm here to tell you that the grace period is over. They aren't waiting for us to make a choice anymore. They're taking it away. I'm a traveling insurance adjuster. I spent half my life in rental cars. Last Tuesday, I was on my way to Kearney, Nebraska, fighting a miserable bout of highway hypnosis. The detour happened exactly like the others had described. The GPS glitched. The orange signs pushed me off I-80. The washboard dirt road smoothed out into a flawless, silent jet black asphalt. I didn't know about Harrow. I just thought it was a freshly paved county road. But the moment my tires hit the perfect asphalt, my rental car didn't just stall, it died instantly. The headlights shut off, the dashboard went black, the power steering locked up, the engine cut out without as much as a sputter. I coasted to a silent halt in the middle of the road. I tried the ignition, nothing. I checked my phone, it was completely dead, despite being plugged in a minute earlier. It was like I had driven through a localized EMP. I sat there in the absolute suffocating silence. The air in the cabin grew stagnant. After 10 minutes of uselessly turning the key, I got out. A mile down the road, bathed in that sickly bruised yellow light, was the town. At the very edge of the city limits, a large neon sign hummed violently. It read, "The Harrow Inn. Vacancy." I grabbed my overnight bag, locked the useless car, and started walking. When I reached the motel office, I noticed there were no cars in the lot. The office was a small square building with perfectly clean glass windows. I pushed the door open. Ding dong. The air inside smelled overwhelmingly of ozone and industrial bleach. Behind the counter stood a man in a crisp white button-down shirt and a maroon vest. He was staring at the wall, completely motionless. "Hello?" I said. He didn't turn around. Instead, his body pivoted on its heels, a flawless, frictionless 180-degree rotation. His face was impossibly smooth. His eyes were those flat, deepless, brown discs. "Welcome to the temporary domicile," he said. The voice was that same flat, synthesized drone, echoing from the air rather than from his throat. My car died down the road," I said, trying to ignore the deep, primal alarm bells ringing in my head. "Do you think I can use your phone to call a tow truck? Maybe get a room for the night?" "The communication line is severed," the clerk stated. He didn't blink. "You must engage in the slumber. You will rent the chamber." He reached beneath the desk and pulled out a brass key attached to a heavy red plastic diamond. He slid it across the counter. It moved perfectly straight, stopping exactly halfway between us. "How much?" I asked, reaching for my wallet. "We do not require the paper," the clerk said. He leaned forward, his torso moving without his lips shifting. "We require the observation of the unconscious state. You must demonstrate the paralysis." My blood ran cold. The what? "Take the key. Proceed to chamber 7. Assume the horizontal position. We will observe the paralysis." I grabbed the key. My hands were shaking and backed out of the office. Every instinct in me told me to run back down the pitch black road. But it was 40 degrees outside and I had a dead car and no phone. I figured I'd just lock the door to room 7, barricade it, wait for sunrise. I found room 7 on the ground floor. I unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. I flipped the light switch on. It looked like a motel room, but only if someone had built it based on a low-resolution photograph. The television on the dresser wasn't a TV, it was a solid block of black plastic with a screen painted on it in a glossy gray. The lamp on the nightstand had a bulb, but no power cord. It just emitted light from within the glass. I walked over to the bathroom. There was an archway, but no door. Inside there was a mirror and a sink, but the faucet had no hole for water to come out of. It was just a solid piece of mottled chrome. Then I touched the bed. The blanket was incredibly heavy, feeling almost like a thick sheet of rubber. Underneath it, there was no mattress. It was a solid, rectangular block of dense foam. It didn't compress when I pushed on it. The pillows were as hard as wood. They didn't know what a bed actually was. They just knew what it looked like from the outside. I backed away from the bed. I needed to leave this place, now. I walked to the front door and threw the deadbolt. I dragged the heavy plastic dresser in front of it. Then I backed into the corner of the room, clutching my bag to my chest, and stared at the floor. For an hour, there was only that crushing, padded silence. But then I heard it. Swish, swish, swish. The sound of those gliding footsteps on the concrete walkway outside. Not just one person. Dozens. The footsteps stopped right outside my room. I held my breath. I crept toward the window, which was covered by thick, stiff curtains. I peeled back the edge just a fraction of an inch and peered out. And under the yellow glow of the motel overhang, the town of Harrow had gathered. There were at least 50 of them. Men, women, children, the cop, the waitress. They were all standing in rows facing my door. They were perfectly still, their arms hanging at their sides, their flat eyes staring unblinkingly at room number 7. They were waiting for me to go to sleep. Suddenly, the handle to my door jiggled. Clack, clack. "The subject has not assumed the horizontal position," a synthesized voice announced from the other side of the door. It was the clerk. "We must observe the paralysis." The crowd chanted in unison, their metallic voices vibrating the glass of the window. The deadbolt snapped open, not unlocked, it snapped. The metal sheared off under an impossible mechanical force. The door began to push inward, scraping heavily against the dresser I'd used to barricade it. The dresser groaned, sliding an inch across the carpet. So I spun around, bolted for the bathroom, and grabbed a heavy chrome towel rack off the wall. I swung it like a baseball bat at the small frosted window above the fake bathtub. The glass shattered. I hauled myself up. scraping my stomach on the jagged frame, and I tumbled out into the dark alley behind the motel. Behind me, I heard the dresser splinter as the front door was forced completely open. But I didn't look back. I sprinted into the darkness. Behind the motel was a massive cornfield. I dove into the stalks, desperate for cover. But as I crashed through the corn, I realized the final horrifying truth about Harrow. The corn stalks didn't snap or rustle. They clattered. I reached out to push one of them out of my way, and it was hard, smooth, entirely unyielding. It was made of plastic. Thousands of acres of perfectly molded plastic corn. The subject is fleeing. A voice boomed from the motel behind me. Initiate the pursuit protocol. I ran blindly through the plastic labyrinth. Behind me I could hear them. They weren't running. They were gliding through the stalks, their bodies making sickening high-speed thwacking sounds against the plastic leaves. They were moving incredibly fast, their heads staying perfectly level in the dark. I ran until my lungs burned. I tasted blood in my mouth. Finally, I burst out of the plastic corn and tumbled down a steep embankment, hitting the gravel of a county highway. My knees were bleeding. My hands were sliced up. I looked back up the embankment. At the edge of that plastic field, figures were standing perfectly still, silhouetted against the dark. They didn't step onto the gravel. It was as if they were tethered to the town. I walked back down the highway for 6 miles until a passing farmer picked me up with his pickup truck. Harrow isn't just a diorama anymore. It's a roach motel. They figured out how to shut down our machines so we can't leave. If you see the orange detour signs on I-80, just turn around. Drive the wrong way on the highway if you have to. Drive into the ditch. Do whatever it takes. Because if you walk into the Harrow Inn, you're never checking out. Welcome to Harrow, the town that isn't supposed to exist. Account number 6, The Duplicate. If you read the 5th account, the insurance adjuster warned you that the town has figured out how to kill our engines. It acts like a localized EMP. Anything with a microchip or a computerized fuel injection system will die the second it tries to touch that perfect, flawless asphalt. But there is a loophole. And because of that loophole, I survived to warn you about what they're actually doing with the people they trap. My name is Leo. 2 weeks ago, my younger brother Sam and I were driving back from Omaha to a camping ground in Colorado. We'd taken 2 separate vehicles because he was hauling his boat. Sam was driving his brand new 2025 pickup truck loaded with sensors and screens. I was driving our grandfather's 1993 Dodge Ram, a loud, clunky, fully analog diesel beast with manual roll-up windows and exactly 0 microchips. We hit the detour on I-80 around 1 a.m. Sam was leading, I was right behind him. We took the exit, hit that washboard dirt, and drove into the darkness. I didn't notice the transition to the perfect asphalt right away because I was too busy staring at Sam's brake lights. The moment we crossed the town limits of Harrow, under those bruised yellow streetlights, his brand new truck completely died. The taillights shut off, the cab went pitch black. His truck coasted to a silent dead stop right in the middle of the road. My old Dodge, however, didn't even sputter. The analog diesel engine just kept on chugging, unaffected by whatever invisible net that they had thrown over the road. I slammed on my brakes, pulling up right behind his bumper. I left the engine idling and hopped out. The silence there in Harrow was absolute. It swallowed the loud rumble of my diesel engine like a sponge. The air was room temperature, smelling fiercely of ozone and burning copper like a blown electrical transformer. "Sam!" I yelled, walking up to his driver's side door. "Did you throw a belt or something?" Sam was frantically mashing his push-to-start button. "I don't know, man. The whole dash just bricked. The battery's completely dead." He pushed his door open and stepped out into the perfect street. Ding dong. The bell from the gas station on the corner chimed. The door swung open, but it wasn't the attendant who stepped out. It was a swarm. They poured out of that gas station, the diner, the hardware store, dozens of them. Men, women, the cop, the waitress. They moved with that horrifying, perfectly smooth glide, their heads staying entirely level as they flooded the street. There were no footsteps to hear, just the synchronized swish, swish, swish of their clothes as they converged on us at a terrifying speed. "Get my truck, now!" I screamed, grabbing Sam's shoulder, but we were too late. They surrounded us in a tight, impenetrable circle. The stench of bleach and hot plastic was suffocating. They didn't attack us, they didn't punch or bite. Instead, they swarmed Sam. 5 of them grabbed him at once. Their grips were absolute, mechanical, unyielding. The cop grabbed his left arm, the waitress grabbed his right. A man in a suit grabbed him from behind, and Sam screamed, thrashing wildly, but it was like he was chained to concrete pillars. They lifted him entirely off the ground, suspending him in the air. "Let him go!" I roared, throwing a punch at the nearest one. It was a teenager in a Letterman jacket. My knuckles connected with his cheekbone, but it was like punching a bowling ball. My hand just shattered, but the teenager didn't even blink. He just casually shoved my chest with one hand, sending me flying backwards into the grill of my idling Dodge. I scrambled to my feet, gasping for air, and watched this nightmare unfold before me. A figure stepped out from the gas station. It was completely naked, but it had no genitals, no nipples, no belly button. It looked like a perfectly smooth, featureless crash test dummy made of matte, flesh-covered silicone. It glided into the center of the circle, stopping directly in front of my screaming brother. The things holding Sam began to touch him. But they weren't hurting him, they were measuring him. Something. Their perfectly smooth hands traced the contour of his face, the shape of his nose, the length of his arm. They dragged their fingers over his clothes, down his jeans, across his boots. And as they touched Sam, the featureless dummy began to change. It was like watching a 3D printer working at hyperspeed in real time. The silicone of his face warped and rippled, extruding outward from a form of a nose, sinking into the form of eye sockets. The flat brown eyes shifted, lightening into Sam's hazel color. The smooth dome of his head sprouted thick, dark hair. Then clothes began to materialize. The dummy wasn't putting on clothes, the clothes were just extruding directly out of its skin, forming the shape of Sam's flannel shirt and denim jeans. But they were glossy. The flannel pattern was perfect. There were no seams, no loose threads, no real fabric texture. It looked like a plastic action figure model of clothing. "Help me, Leo, please!" Sam sobbed. His voice was cracking. I reached into the bed of my truck and grabbed a heavy forged steel tire iron. I didn't care if I died. I wasn't leaving him here. I charged the circle, swinging the iron bar like a baseball bat. I struck the cop directly behind the back of the knee. There was a sickening crack, shattering fiberglass. The cop's leg buckled inward at the completely wrong angle. He dropped Sam's left arm. I swung again, hitting the waitress in the ribs. She stumbled back, her face glitching into a digitized mask of static terror. Sam hit the pavement. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing his collar and dragging him towards my truck. The circle broke into chaos. We scrambled into the cab of the Dodge. I threw it into gear and slammed on the gas pedal, putting it to the floor. The heavy diesel engine roared, blowing a massive cloud of black soot directly towards the crowd as I pulled forward. We clipped 2 of them. They bounced off the heavy steel bumper with a hollow plastic thud as they flew into the dark. I looked into my rearview mirror as we tore out of town. Under the bruised yellow streetlights, the crowd had reformed. They were standing around the fake Sam, the duplicate. And the duplicate was watching us leave. He raised his hand and gave a perfectly stiff, mechanical wave. "The replication is adequate." A flat, synchronized voice boomed from the town behind us, so loud it rattled from the windows of my truck. "We are ready for the transit." 10 minutes later, the perfect asphalt turned back to dirt. The freezing night air returned, the radio cracked back to life with static. Sam hasn't spoken a word since that night. He just sits in my living room, staring at the wall. Harrow isn't just a trap, it's an assembly line. They aren't learning how to act like us in their little diorama. They're building perfect copies of us. They're trying to figure out how to mass produce us. And if they ever fix that EMP flaw, if they ever figure out how to make their cars work outside of that town, they won't just be waiting on I-80 anymore. They'll be coming to our homes. This is Welcome to Harrow, the town that isn't supposed to exist. Account number 7, The Threshold. If what the guy in the 6th account saw is true, then Harrow isn't just a trap anymore. It's becoming a factory. And as a heavy-duty tow truck driver operating out of Kearney, I can confirm his worst fear. They are trying to leave. But there's a reason they haven't made it to Omaha or to Lincoln yet. They have a tether, and they're desperately trying to figure out how to break it. I work the graveyard shift. Most nights it's just pulling drunk drivers out of ditches or hauling broken down semis to the nearest service station. Around 4 a.m. last Thursday, dispatch sent me out a ping for a dead vehicle on an unnamed county road about 30 miles north of I-80. I rode out in my big rig, heavy-duty diesel-powered flatbed, just like the guy with the old Dodge Ram had pointed out. Diesel engines don't rely on the same computerized electronic control modules that modern cars do. My truck is mechanical, loud, it's built like a tank. When I reached the GPS coordinates, the washboard dirt road suddenly stopped. I hit the brakes and the heavy truck grinded to a halt in a cloud of dust. Directly in front of my bumper, the dirt ended in a perfectly straight, razor-sharp line, giving way to an expanse of flawless jet black asphalt. The transition was so abrupt it looked like someone had drawn a line in the earth with a ruler. About 20 feet onto that black asphalt sat a 2024 Honda Accord. Its lights were off. It was completely dead. Standing next to the Accord was a man in a beige trench coat and a fedora. I rolled down my window where my truck was parked in the dirt. The Nebraska wind was howling, whipping dust and dried corn husks through the air. But as I looked at the man on the asphalt, my stomach did a slow, icy roll. His clothes weren't moving. The wind had to be blowing like 20 miles an hour, but his trench coat was completely rigid. The brim of the hat of his fedora didn't flutter. His tie hung perfectly straight, looking as if it was made of heavy cast iron. He was standing in a vacuum, completely unaffected by the physics of the real world just 20 feet away. I grabbed my heavy Maglite flashlight and I stepped out of the cab, keeping my boots firmly planted on the dirt. Dispatch sent me out, I yelled over the wind. You needin' a tow? The man didn't turn his body. His neck just swiveled, smoothly locking his head towards me. Under the beam of my flashlight, his skin looked like some kind of matte silicone. His eyes were flat, muddy brown disc. I do require the transit, he stated. His voice was that loud, synthesized drone that the others described, cutting through the warring wind with perfect, unnatural clarity. The vessel has suffered the localized failure. Please transport me to the population center. You want to go to Omaha? I asked, my hand slipping down to the heavy steel wrench hanging on my belt. Yes, the population center, he repeated exactly. I wanted to leave, but curiosity, this deep, terrible dread, kept me rooted to the spot. Now I needed to know what this thing was capable of. I unwound the heavy steel winch cable from the back of my flatbed and dragged it toward the edge of the dirt. I stopped right at that perfect dividing line. I didn't let my steel-toe boot cross onto the black asphalt. I can hook the car up, I called out. You can't ride in the towed vehicle. It's company policy. You'll have to sit with me in the cab of my truck. The entity stared at my truck. For a moment it did nothing. Then it began to walk toward me. It moved with that horrifying frictionless glide. Its head remained perfectly level. It didn't take steps, it just smoothly advanced toward the edge of the asphalt. I will enter the loud vessel, it droned. It reached the dividing line. It lifted its foot off the pristine black asphalt and stepped onto the dirt road. The second its shoe touched real Nebraska earth, the entity violently malfunctioned. It was like watching a machine being violently unplugged. The moment it crossed the threshold, the weight of our reality simply crushed it. The wind caught its trench coat, but instead of the fabric fluttering, the entire coat cracked and splintered like thin plastic. The entity let out a sound that was not a scream, but this deep, distorted dial-up modem screech that slowed down and warped into a heavy bass, heavy groan. It tried to take another step toward my truck, but its perfect glide was gone now. Without the black asphalt beneath it, it had no reality to rely on. The actual gravity and actual physics began to take a toll on it. Its knees buckled entirely backwards with a sickening pop. It collapsed into the dirt, thrashing mechanically. Under the beam of my flashlight, I saw its face begin to sag. The silicone skin lost its rigidity, melting slightly, pulling these flat brown eyes downward into drooping, grotesque ovals. It was suffocating in our atmosphere. It could not exist off the grid of its diorama. Ever transit failed. The voice dragged out of its mouth in a slow, demonic crawl. It reached out with one molded, plastic-looking hand, grabbing at the dirt, desperately dragging its heavy, melting body backwards. The moment its torso crossed back over the razor-sharp line onto the black asphalt, it snapped back to life. The melting face instantly pulled tight and smooth. The broken knee snapped back into place. The entity stood up, completely rigid once again, insulated in its bubble of perfect, dead silence. It stared at me. Its chest was heaving in a pantomime of heavy breathing, though I knew it didn't need oxygen. The environment is hostile, it stated, its voice back to the crisp, synthesized drone. The physical parameters must be adjusted. We will expand the foundation. We will expand the foundation. I sat with those words for a minute. It wasn't going to give up. It realized that it couldn't survive on our dirt, in our wind, underneath the weight of our physics. I didn't say a word. I dropped the winch cable, I jumped into the cab of my diesel flatbed, and I threw it into reverse. I backed up a full quarter mile down the dirt road before I felt safe enough to turn around and gun it back to the highway. They're printing duplicates. They're trying to board our vehicles. But for now, they're trapped on that black asphalt. It acts as their power source, their life support, their bridge to whatever they actually come from. But pay attention to what you see on the roads out there. If you see a county road being paved in the middle of the night by a crew that you don't recognize, turn around. They aren't waiting for us to wander to Harrow anymore. They're paving their way out. This is Welcome to Harrow, the town that isn't supposed to exist. Account number 8, The Paving Crew. If you are reading this, and you still think that Harrow is just some static haunted house sitting quietly in the Nebraska cornfield, you need to wake up. The tow truck driver in the last account was right. They found out that they can't survive off their perfect black asphalt, so they aren't trying to adapt to our world anymore. They're converting our world into theirs. I'm an inspector in the Nebraska Department of Transportation, My job is to drive out county lines and sign off on road repairs, make sure contractors are laying aggregate correctly, check the drainage ditches meet the state code. It's boring work, very bureaucratic. But a few days ago, a county office got an angry call from a local farmer. He claimed a crew had been out paving a 3-mile stretch of dirt road near his property line all night, keeping him up with strange flashing yellow lights. The problem was, the DOT had no record of any contracts in that grid. We didn't approve of it, and we sure weren't paying for it. My boss sent me out there, standard issue 2018 Ford F-150 county truck. Go out there and slap a stop work order on whoever was doing the unauthorized paving. I found the road around dusk. The farmer hadn't been exaggerating. As I turned off the main county highway, I saw the fresh asphalt stretching out into the twilight. I rolled to a stop where the gravel met the new pavement. My truck's engine immediately choked, sputtered, and died. The dashboard went completely black. I'd heard about the EMP rumors from these very forums. I'd read the accounts, but part of me thought this was all just some massive internet creepypasta roleplay. But as I sat in that suddenly suffocating silence of my dead truck, the reality of it hit me, almost like a physical blow. The crickets outside had just stopped. The wind completely died. I grabbed a heavy maglite flashlight and my clipboard, forced my door open and stepped out. The air smelled like industrial bleach and cooked copper. I kept my boots firmly planted on the gravel, refusing to step 1 inch out into that black asphalt. I shined my flashlight down the road. About a quarter-mile away, bathed in that sickly, bruised yellow light, was the paving crew. I started walking down the shoulder, keeping to the dirt and the prairie grass parallel to the new road. As I got closer, the sheer wrongness of their operation became clearer. Paving a road is a violently loud, chaotic process. You have dump trucks backing up, asphalt pavers are roaring, steel drum rollers vibrating the ground, men shouting over the noise. But this crew was completely and utterly silent. There were no dump trucks, there was only one machine, a massive monolithic block of matte black metal, vaguely resembling a steamroller. It had no exhaust pipes, no headlights, no branding whatsoever. It just glided forward, moving at a steady crawl. It wasn't laying asphalt, it was converting the earth. I'd never seen anything like this before. As the front of the massive machine passed over the rutted dirt and the gravel, the ground beneath it literally changed on a molecular level. It didn't pour hot tar, the dirt simply dissolved into the flawless, jet-black, room temperature surface. Walking behind the machine were workers, about 20 of them. They were dressed in spotless, unsoiled, high-visibility orange vests and hard hats. They weren't walking, they were gliding. Swish, swish, swish. Their heads stayed perfectly level. Some of them, they held shovels and rakes, and they mimicked the motions of road workers. They would swing a rake through the air 2 inches above the pristine asphalt, their arms looping in stiff robotic pantomimes. I stopped walking. I was about 50 feet away. I was hidden in the tall prairie grass on the shoulder. I was terrified to even breathe. One of the workers, a man holding a clipboard that looked suspiciously like mine, suddenly stopped his gliding. He didn't turn his body. His neck just swiveled, pivoting 180 degrees to look directly into the dark grass where I was standing. His face was terribly smooth, his eyes flat brown discs. An observer is present in the unformatted zone, he announced. His voice was a booming, synthesized drone that echoed across the dead air. Every single worker stopped in perfect unison, and their heads snapped towards me. "We require the biological template," a woman in a hard hat stated. "The foundation must be populated. Capture the template." They stepped off the road, I expected them to collapse the moment their bodies hit the dirt, just like the guy in the trench coat from the last story. But they didn't. They hitched, they stuttered. Their smooth glides turned into violently jerky mechanical stumbles, like stop-action animation, but they didn't melt. They kept coming. They seemed to be upgrading. They've built enough tolerance to our reality to survive off the asphalt for short bursts of times. They're fighting through the crushing weight of our physics. Their joints are popping and cracking with every jagged step. Their faces twitching wildly. I dropped my clipboard and all I could do was run. I sprinted through the tall grass, my heart hammering in my throat, aiming for the dark silhouette of my dead county truck in the distance. Behind me I could hear them tearing through the brush. It wasn't the sound of humans running, it was the sound of heavy, unyielding machinery crashing blindly through obstacles. Submit to the formatting. The synchronized voices chanted in a staggering, glitching chorus behind me. The town must grow. The town must grow. I reached the dirt road, vaulting over the ditch and sprinting past my useless truck. I didn't stop. I ran a full 2 miles down the gravel road in the pitch black until my lungs were screaming and I finally saw the headlights of a passing tractor. I quit my job the next morning. I am moving my family to Colorado this weekend. I checked the state maps before I lost my access to the DOT servers. If you draw a line from the original reported location of Harrow, following the path of that new black asphalt, it's heading directly for Interstate 80. They aren't just trapping the people who take a wrong turn anymore. They're building something new, a runway right to the main artery of the country. And once that black asphalt connects to the interstate, they won't just be a ghost town anymore. They will be a plague. This is Welcome to Harrow, the town that isn't supposed to exist. Account number 9, The Merge. If you're still driving on Interstate 80 at night, you're playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded cylinder. The inspector from the 8th account tried to warn us. He said the black asphalt was heading for the interstate. He was right, and they made it. I was a Nebraska State Patrol trooper. I say was because I turned in my badge 48 hours ago. I am not equipped to fight this, and frankly, neither is the United States military. You can't shoot an enemy that isn't technically alive, and you can't bomb a town that isn't on any topographical map. It happened 3 nights ago. I was working the graveyard shift, patrolling a long, empty stretch of I-80 near the Dawson County line. At 2:45 a.m., my radio cracked with a frantic dispatch call. Multiple 911 calls were dropping simultaneously from mile marker 242. People were screaming about a massive pileup, dead engines, people walking on the highway. Then every single call went to dead static. I flipped my lights and my sirens on and tore down the eastbound lane 120 miles an hour. As I approached mile marker 240, my cruiser's engine sputtered. The digital dashboard flickered violently. A sharp smell of ozone filled the cabin. I slammed on the brakes, throwing the cruiser onto the grassy median just as the engine died completely. The headlights shut off, plunging me into darkness. I sat there for a second, my heart hammering against my ribs. The radio was dead. My cell phone was a black brick. I popped the truck manually, grabbed my AR-15 patrol rifle, clicked my heavy flashlight on, and started walking down the median toward mile marker 242. What I saw when I crested the hill on that highway, it'll haunt me till the day I die. The interstate didn't look like an interstate anymore. About a half-mile stretch of the concrete highway had been utterly consumed. It was replaced by that flawless room temperature jet black asphalt. It had spread across all 4 lanes, bleeding over the rumble strips and onto the grass like a cancerous oil spill. Stranded on that black stretch were about 20 vehicles, semi-trucks, minivans, sedans. Every single one of them was dead. And walking among the dead cars were the people of Harrow, hundreds of them. The pale, bruised yellow streetlights had sprouted up right through the median, illuminating the highway in that sickening, archival glow. The silence was absolute, heavy enough to make my eardrums throb. I stayed low to the tall grass, peering through the optics of my rifle. They were conducting something, I don't know what it was, a mass harvest? They weren't bothering with the diner simulations anymore, the fake police routines. They didn't need to lure anyone off the highway because the highway, it belongs to them now. I watched a family in a stranded SUV. The doors were locked. The father was frantically hitting the steering wheel. A group of 5 Harrow entities, 3 men in business suits, 2 women in floral dresses. They completely surrounded the car. They didn't break the glass. They simply clamped their smooth, flawless hands onto the door frames and pulled. The metal groaned and tore like wet cardboard. They ripped off the doors completely from their hinges, tossed them into the perfect asphalt. The screams of the family were instantly swallowed by the dead air. The entities reached in, their arms moving with brutal mechanical efficiency, and they dragged the family out onto the street. From the shadows of the yellow streetlight, the naked, featureless silicone dummies emerged. There were dozens of them, gliding forward to meet the terrified victims. I watched through my scope as they began the replication process on a mass scale. The entities held the screaming civilians down, while the dummies pressed their hands against the victims' faces, measuring, extruding, morphing. I couldn't just watch, I am sworn to protect. I aimed my rifle at the nearest entity, a man in a suit holding down the father, and I pulled the trigger. Crack! The gunshot was deafening, a violent rupture in the absolute silence of the black asphalt. The .556 round hit the entity square in the temple. Its head snapped to the side, a chunk of smooth plastic-like skull shattering into the air. There was no blood, just a burst of gray dust and spark. The entity didn't fall, it simply froze, its head tilted at a broken angle. Then all of a sudden, all of them stopped. Hundreds of heads swiveled in perfect, terrifying unison, locking onto my position in the grass. An armed variant has entered the perimeter. A single synchronized voice echoed from hundreds of mouths. It sounded like a massive metallic choir. The variable is hostile. Neutralize the threat. They dropped their victims. The entire crowd turned and began to march toward me. They weren't gliding anymore, just like the DOT inspector had said. They were upgrading. They were walking, stiff, heavy marching steps. Their boots hitting the asphalt in perfect time. Thud, thud, thud. I fired again, dropping a woman in a dress with a center mass shot. But 2 more entities instantly stepped over her glitching, thrashing body. I realized then with absolute certainty that if I stayed, I was going to be measured. I was going to be replicated, and the thing that walked out would not be me anymore. I slung my rifle over my shoulder and ran. I ran back toward my dead cruiser, praying that the EMP field hadn't expanded while I was watching. As I sprinted, the ground beneath my feet began to vibrate. I looked over my shoulder. The massive black paving machine the inspector had described was now rolling down the center of the interstate. It was moving faster now. Behind it, the perfect black asphalt was expanding, eating the concrete highway, chasing me down the median. I reached my cruiser, grabbing the keys, and kept running. I didn't stop until my lungs were bleeding. I hit the county overpass 3 miles down the road. I flagged down a long-haul trucker, an older rig, and I told him the highway was collapsed. It was gone. By the time I got back to the precinct and convinced my captain to send a heavily armed convoy to mile marker 242, the sun was already coming up. We arrived at the coordinates, but something was different. There was nothing there. The black asphalt was gone. The yellow streetlights were gone. The stranded cars, all gone. The highway was just standard cracked concrete baking in the early morning sun. My captain looked at me like I was insane. He asked me to take a breathalyzer test. But damn it, I know what I saw. Harrow isn't tied to a specific physical location anymore. This town is a program, and that black asphalt, it's the code. They can deploy it over the interstate, snatch 20 cars at a time, format the victims, and then retract the town into whatever dimension it hides in before the sun comes back up. Do not drive cross-country at night. If your GPS glitches, if your car stalls, if the road suddenly gets too smooth, leave your car and run. Run into the dirt, because the diorama is open for business, and it has a new exhibit now. And that new exhibit is us. This is Welcome to Harrow, the town that isn't supposed to exist. This is account number 10, the final account, the integration. If you've read any of the first 9 accounts, you've watched the progression happen in real time. You've watched Harrow start as a clumsy diorama, a trap for tired drivers on a dirt road. You watched it learn how to lure us in, how to shut down our machines, how to build perfect copies of our bodies. The trooper in that last account thought the worst case scenario was the town manifesting itself on Interstate 80 to harvest us in bulk. But he was wrong. The harvest was not the end game. The harvest was just the recruitment. My name is David. I live in a quiet, manicured suburb in Omaha. 3 days ago, my fiance, Elena, was driving back from a work conference in Denver. She was taking I-80 east. At 2:30 a.m., she called me. She was frantic, saying traffic had dead stopped near mile marker 242. The electronics in her dashboard were sparking. There were people ripping the doors off cars ahead of her. Then the call dropped, completely dead static. I called the police. I called the highway patrol. I drove out there myself as the sun came up, but there was nothing. No pileup, no broken glass. The highway was completely clear. For 2 agonizing days, I thought she was dead. Then yesterday evening, I heard a car pull up into the driveway. I rushed to the front windows. It was Elena's car. I ran out the front door crying, and I threw my arms around her. And as she stepped out of the driver's seat, I buried my face in her neck, thanking God that she was safe. But the moment I touched her, the relief had vanished. It was replaced by a cold, primal terror that freezed me up. It seized my lungs. Her skin was room temperature. It felt heavy and dense, like thick silicone stretching over steel. And the smell, she didn't smell like her vanilla perfume or even the stale air of a long car ride. She smelled intensely of industrial bleach and cooked copper. "Elena?" I whispered, pulling back to look at her. "I have returned to the domicile," she said. Her voice sounded like it was coming from the air between us, not her throat. It was perfectly flat, a synthesized, emotionless drone. I stared at her face. It was Elena, down to the exact shade of her hazel eyes, the slight crook in her nose, but she had no pores. Her skin was a flawless matte surface. She didn't blink. She just stared directly at my forehead. Are you okay? What happened out there on the highway?" I stammered, backing up a step. "The transit was interrupted by a variable. The variable was neutralized," she stated. She didn't close her car door. She just turned and began to walk toward the house. I watched her walk up the driveway, my heart hammered against my ribs. Her head didn't bob. Her torso remained perfectly, rigidly level as she glided over the concrete, her legs moving in a flawless mechanical rhythm beneath her. Swish, swish, swish. She walked into the house and went straight into the kitchen. She stopped in front of the counter. "I require the sustenance," she said to the empty room, "to maintain the fleshly vessel." I slowly followed her inside, my hands shaking so violently. I had to clench them into fists. I remember reading these very forums. I remember the trucker in that second account talking about the diner. I remember the guy with the old Dodge talking about the silicone dummies. They aren't just taking us. They are replacing us. I opened the fridge and pulled out a slice of leftover pizza. I put it on a plate and slid it across the counter towards her. I needed to see what she would do. I needed to know for sure. She picked up the cold slice with 2 smooth fingers. She brought it to her lips and took a bite. Her jaw moved exactly, up and down. Clack, clack, clack. Her teeth struck together with the heavy, hollow sound of dense plastic. She chewed, but her throat didn't move. She didn't swallow. She chewed up the mass of food just packed tightly into her cheeks, bulging her flawless skin outward. She turned her flat brown hazel eyes to me, the corners of her mouth pulled back horizontally, stretching her lips over her blindingly white teeth in a grotesque imitation of a smile. "The facial configuration for satisfaction," she droned. I backed out of the kitchen. I didn't say a word. I turned and ran for the front door. I needed to get to my car. I needed to get away from her, get to the police, tell someone that the things from the highway, they're infiltrating our homes. I threw open the front door and I sprinted down the driveway. I stepped onto the sidewalk and I stopped dead at the curb. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over my quiet suburban street. The streetlights flickered on. They weren't the harsh white LED lights that our HOA had installed last year. They were pale, a bruised, sickly yellow. I looked at the asphalt on my street. Yesterday it had been gray, cracked, patched with tar. Now it was jet black. It was flawless. It absorbed the yellow light like a sponge, completely silent and perfectly smooth. I looked at the house across the street from mine. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was out watering his lawn. He was holding the hose, but there was no water coming out. He was just sweeping the dry hose back and forth over the grass, his head perfectly level. His face was entirely smooth. Down the block, a woman was walking a golden retriever, but the dog was moving with a stiff animatronic gait, its legs snapping up and down with rigid precision. The front door of my house clicked open. I turned around. Elena was standing on the porch. Behind her, standing in the shadows of my living room, were 3 men in suits and a woman in a floral dress. They'd been waiting in the house this entire time. "The biological template is attempting to flee," Elena announced to the street, her voice booming with mechanical reverb. Mr. Henderson stopped watering his lawn. The woman stopped walking the mechanical dog. Doors up and down the street began to open. Dozens of people stepped out into their porches. People I had known for years, people I had shared beers with. Every single one of them turned their heads to look at me. In perfect, terrifying unison, they all blinked. Submit to the formatting. The entire neighborhood changed. The sound was deafening. A massive choir of synthesized dead voices echoed under the yellow lights. "The town must grow. The town must grow. The town must grow." I'm writing this down from the locked cab of my truck. I managed to get inside, but the engine won't start. The dashboard is black. The EMP field is already active here. They're surrounding the truck now, their smooth hands pressing against the glass. They aren't trying to break it yet. They're just watching me. They're waiting for me to step out into the air. Harrow isn't a town in Nebraska anymore. It is a virus. They use the highway to harvest our templates, and now they're quietly inserting the duplicates back into the population. They're paving our neighborhoods while we sleep. They're changing our streetlights out. They're replacing our families. Look at your spouse. Look at your neighbors. Watch how they walk. Look at their eyes. Check if the street outside your house is suddenly a little too smooth, a little too dark, and a little too quiet. If they glide, if they don't bob their heads, if they smell like bleach, don't let them know that you know. Because once they see you for what you are, and once you see them for who they are, the diorama drops, and you become the next